Good morning.
I am Jeff Denner, and I represent the defendant in this case.
Okay.
We have never met. We have never spoken, correct?
Yes.
This is our first time confronting each other in court today, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, I note that you've been in this country for 5 years.
Yes.
You seem to be able to speak English and understand English quite well, yes?
Yes.
You've been having no difficulty understanding the questions that have been asked to you or anything that's been going on in court, correct?
Yes.
With regard to this, how many times have you met with either members of the district attorney's office or the Boston Police Department to discuss your testimony in this case?
But like,
Could you speak, sir? My hearing isn't so great. Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Okay.
And if you can't hear me, I'll speak up a little bit. We'll both do that, okay?
okay. About like 3 to 4 times.
Okay, and when was the last time?
Is last week when I come here, but the court is delayed or something.
All right, again, you're going to have to speak up a little bit for me and perhaps for the jury too. So when you met last week, did you sit down with some members of the DA's office?
Yes.
And did you go over your testimony?
Sorry?
Did you talk about your proposed testimony in this trial with them when you were here last week?
Yes.
And did you tell them, did they ask you questions and did you answer questions? Was that the format of your meeting?
No, just like I come here and I just met him and he just talk about you have to come tomorrow, like time and that's no.
Okay, sir, I honestly didn't catch that. If you could repeat it again for me.
Like I met him when I come last week because to like what time I have to come tomorrow in the court and some like, you know.
Did you have any conversation with them about the actual content of your testimony, the substantive content, what you saw happen and what you perceived? Or did you just talk about what time you had to be in court?
Yes.
Yes, you had some conversation about the content?
Yes.
Okay. And did they make suggestions to you about how you should testify?
Sorry?
Did they make any suggestions to you, guide you about how you should testify in court?
Not really much.
Not much, but some?
Yes.
Okay. And I think you testified today, excuse me, did you review any documents, any reports, any grand jury testimony? Did you review anything to testify here today?
No.
Do you remember testifying in a grand jury?
Yes.
And did you ever read the transcript of your grand jury testimony?
No.
You've never reviewed it. Do you remember talking to the police and they've executed some police reports about what you told them? Yes?
Yes.
Did you ever review those police reports?
No.
So to testify here today, or last week when you first came, you reviewed absolutely no documents for your testimony?
No.
And with whom did you discuss your testimony other than in that one meeting? Anyone else?
Sorry?
You said you had a meeting at the DA's office last week when you were here and you talked about your testimony, correct?
Yes.
Other than that, between then and now, let's say, have you discussed your proposed testimony with anyone else?
No.
Okay. And you live in New York City now? And you're
Yes.
working in New York City, yes?
Yes.
But on July 23rd of 2013, you had been in Boston for some period of time and working in Boston, yes?
Yes.
And today you testified, you were asked, if you recall, what the defendant's demeanor was, correct? Actually, strike that. You were asked about the demeanor of the person you saw on the TV screen, right?
Yes.
And what was your answer to that?
Sorry?
How did you describe, if you recall this morning, about his demeanor?
I don't get it.
Do you know what demeanor means?
No, not.
But yet you remember answering a question this morning when you were asked about demeanor, you gave an answer, correct?
Yes.
So are you suggesting that when you were asked that question, you didn't even know what it meant? I withdraw that question. You were asked a question this morning about demeanor. Do you recall that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Recall? Okay. Do you recall answering that question?
Yes.
When you answered the question, did you know what demeanor meant so you could answer the question responsively?
Yes.
Okay. What is your understanding of what the term demeanor means?
Is the guy who was
Sir, was that your answer? I didn't hear your answer if that's the answer you gave. Could you repeat it?
the guy who was in the TV, in the camera?
How did he look?
With
Would
the
that be demeanor?
black
Basically
t-shirt.
how he looked to you
Yeah.
when he came in, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so that we can agree that's what you were answering when you heard the term demeanor, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And when he came in, you said that he was, if I'm accurately getting what you said he was kind of odd, yes? Kind of
Yes.
different and odd,
Yes.
and he walked around a lot,
Yes.
and he talked a lot. He talked to everybody and just kept talking and talking and talking, yes?
Yes.
And at some point you saw him take a bottle of booze out and start drinking it, yes?
Yes.
Was that alcohol in a paper bag or just
No, it is in the hand.
in
In the hand.
in the hand?
Yeah.
Okay, but was the hand around a paper bag or was it just a bottle?
No, it's just the bottle.
Okay, so he started drinking alcohol, and did he kind of slug it down and drink a whole gulp of it?
Yes.
Okay, and he counted his money 10 times.
Yes.
Have you ever seen anyone count their money 10 times before?
No.
Have you ever seen anyone count their money 5 times before?
No.
I mean, it'd be fair to say that most people count their money once, maybe twice,
Yes.
and do the transaction, correct?
Yes.
And when he got his phone, he had to sign for the phone, correct?
Yes.
And presumably he's expected to sign his name, right?
Yes.
And he signed the name Slim Shady.
Yes.
Did you think his name was Slim Shady?
I don't know. Because I don't need any proof of address or proof of ID for the...
I know that, but if he had said his name was God, would you have thought his name was God?
I don't know, because from on here his name, everybody have difficult, so I cannot say it.
Okay, I didn't hear that, sir. Could you repeat that one more time?
Because the name is, everybody have difficult name, sometimes I don't get it, so I
Okay.
thought it's the name.
So you thought his real name was Slim Shady,
Yes.
and you didn't make any inquiry of him, is that your name? Or
No.
But if that were not his name, that was just a made-up name, would that seem a little odd to you as well?
Like, he's a customer, so I cannot ask too many questions,
Okay. And he paid for other people, didn't he?
Yes.
I mean, do you have any reason to believe that he knew the two individuals, the man in the white shirt and the lady? Ever met them before?
I don't know.
Did they seem like they were strangers just talking with each other?
Yes.
And out of the blue, he paid for both of them?
Sorry?
He paid for both of their fees, their transfer fees, correct?
Yes.
And he had long conversations with them, did he not?
Yes.
And he also paid for two other individuals, but it's your understanding that he was related to them, his girlfriend and his brother, correct?
Yes.
Was there anything else about his behavior while he was in there that you considered odd, kind of crazy?
No, no.
So it's just
Like-
the things that you've mentioned, correct?
Like he's talking too much and he's like moving, this.
I mean, he was moving around talking, he was agitated.
Yes.
Kind of had a strange look on his face, yes?
Yes,
Object to the form of that question, Your Honor.
Your answer was yes, sir?
yes.
Okay. And then at some point, you got a little worried about him, didn't you?
Like usually I don't have to worry about because he's a customer, so
Okay. But that's not really answering my question, is it? Usually you don't have to do a lot of things. Usually people don't bring out booze and start drinking right in front of you, do they?
no.
Okay. So apart from the unusual, dealing with the unusual here, when he paid you, you put the cash in front of you, didn't you?
Yes.
You didn't put it in your cash register, did you?
No.
You were afraid to open your cash register, weren't you?
No, because like when I finish the everything transaction, then I have to put the cash inside because sometimes those people, like they saying I give extra because it's happened before with me like couple of times, so I just keep the cash in outside.
Okay, and that's fair.
That's right.
But there was something about him that was very different, very odd, and very unsettling to you, wasn't there?
Yeah, look like.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Well, Mr. Patel, what was unsettling? When you
Sir?
said, do you understand, what was unsettling about this man in the black T-shirt who bought the phone?
Like I don't get it.
Okay. Was there anything about the transaction, what about that transaction made you feel uncomfortable, like Mr. Denner asked you?
Like I don't feel anything uncomfortable.
Okay. And when you say you don't feel anything uncomfortable, were you afraid?
No.
Okay. Were you able to complete the transaction?
Yes.
And what happened at the end of the transaction?
Like nothing. He just paid the bill and he left.
And how many phones have you sold? In the time that you worked at Rotary Variety at Metro PCS, how many cell phones have you sold?
On the all day?
Just the entire time you've worked there, not just that day.
Not sure. Like 3-4 phone every day.
How many?
3 or 4.
Average?
Yes.
Every day?
Mm-hmm.
Over how long a period of time?
Sorry?
Over a couple of years?
No, like I check every month.
What was different about this transaction compared to all the other phones you've sold?
Nothing different. Like I always do same thing in a different phone too.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Patel.
Sure. There may have been nothing different about the transaction, the buying and the selling of the phone, but there was certainly something very different about that man, wasn't there?
Yeah, about like he counting money.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. Excuse me.
Sean Stanton?
That name again, sir?
Sean Stanton.
Right this way, please. Stand here. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the jury and the court in the cause now at hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
Right this way, please. Why don't you just watch yourself right here? So you can listen.
Inquire, Your Honor. Good morning, sir. Could you please introduce yourself to the court and to the jury and spell your full name?
My name is Sean Stanton. First name S-E-A-N.
And,
Last name S-T-A-N-T-O-N.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Are you employed?
Yes.
And generally, what do you do for work?
I'm a senior financial analyst.
And how long have you been doing that for?
3 years.
Do you live in the city of Boston?
I do.
Were you living in the city of Boston back in July of 2013?
I was.
What section of the city were you living in, sir?
South Boston,
And where in South Boston were you living in July of 2013?
58 Gate Street, apartment 3.
And as far as that apartment goes, what floor was that on?
3rd floor, it's the top floor.
Were you living there alone or with someone else?
With someone else, my fiance.
I want to direct your attention back to Tuesday, July 23rd of 2013, ask you some questions about that date, okay?
Okay.
Were you working on that day?
I was.
What time did you get home from work?
Approximately 7 p.m.
Okay, and after you got home from work, did you go right to 58 Gate Street?
I did.
What did you do that night?
Did some work, ate dinner, did some work.
Just generally, can you describe the layout of your apartment on the 3rd floor at 58 Gates with particular attention to where your bedroom was?
Sure. The kitchen and living room are towards the back of the complex, and there are 2 bedrooms that face Gate Street.
And were there any windows to your bedroom?
Sure, yeah. In the master bedroom, there are 2 windows, one in between 58 and 60, and then one facing the street.
And where was, were you familiar just generally with Gate Streets and the houses on that street back then?
Yes.
And where was 57 Gate Street in relation to 58?
Across the street, slightly diagonal. If you're facing out the window, slightly diagonal to the left.
And Mr. Stanton, do you recall where you were around midnight, July 23rd, heading into July 24th of 2013?
Yep. I was getting ready for bed. Just in my bedroom.
You were where?
I was in my bedroom getting ready for bed.
And what happened as you were in your bedroom getting ready for bed that evening?
I heard screams.
And the screams that you heard, where were they coming from?
The street.
And as far as the screams that you heard, could you tell how many people?
One sounded like a female.
And when you say coming out on from the street, where in the street in relation to 58 Gates, if you could tell at that point?
Down and to the left in the direction of 57 Gate Street.
And what did you wind up doing, sir?
I ran to the window as soon as I heard the screams.
And when you ran to the window, what did you do at that point?
I opened up the window. It was already opened. I opened it up all the way.
Where did you wind up looking?
Down and to the left in the direction of 57 Gate Street.
And as best you can you describe what the lighting was like that evening on the street?
Sure. The lighting is strong when I look down to the left in the direction of 57 Gate Street. It's a little bit weaker as it goes up the street towards Dorchester Street.
And just generally, sir, relative to your address at 58 Gates, what's the first street that you would come to if you went all the way down to the left walking out of 58 Gates?
East 8th Street.
And what's the first street you'd come to if you walked out of your house and went all the way up to the right?
Telegraph Street.
I just want to show you a photograph that's been marked exhibit number 178 in this case. And just to ask you generally if you recognize the area depicted in this photograph.
Yes, I recognize it.
And what do you recognize depicted in that photograph, sir?
I recognize my apartment, 58 Gate Street.
It's captured in this photograph?
Yes.
And just putting exhibit number 178 on the monitor, sir, for a moment. Your particular building, directing your attention to the right-hand side of exhibit number 178, where would your building be?
It's to the right. It's right across the street from the police truck there.
Okay, this truck right here?
Yes.
And when you say to the right of the truck, you're talking about
Yes.
this building right here?
Correct.
And that's generally the area that you were looking out of late on July 23rd?
Correct.
And the windows, do you see this lighter portion of the building right here?
Mm-hmm.
Where were your bedroom windows in relation to that lighter portion?
It's all the way to the right. Top right.
And just showing you this particular photograph, taking it off the monitor, directing your attention to the top right corner of Exhibit 178. What do you see there?
It's my bedroom.
Can this photograph be published to the jury or not? As you looked out your window, what did you see, sir?
I saw a male on top of a female. He had his hand in the collarbone, his left hand in the collarbone neck region of her. He was on top of her, and he had his right hand, he was making a punching motion.
And let me direct your attention back for a moment. Prior to hearing the screams, your apartment, you said you had bedroom windows in your bedroom, correct?
Correct.
Did you have any type of air conditioning in the apartment?
I do, I have central air.
Okay. Did you have it back then?
I did.
Was it working that night?
It wasn't on.
It wasn't on. And
No.
what was the condition of your windows just prior to you hearing that scream?
They were open.
And what did you hear, if anything, just prior to hearing the scream?
Heavy footsteps.
Okay. And the heavy footsteps that you heard, were those, where did those sound like they were coming from?
Downhill.
Downhill. From which direction?
From the direction of, from Telegraph Street towards East 8th Street.
How long did you continue looking out the window, Mr. Stanton?
As soon as I witnessed a male on top of the female, I ran to get my cell phone, so a couple seconds.
And from the front of 57 Gate Streets, where, if anywhere, where did you see those people, the two people you described, go?
When I first witnessed it?
Correct.
Well, they were in the doorway of 57 Gate Street.
Okay. During that initial observation, did you ever lose sight of them at any point?
No.
And where did you wind up going after you heard and saw this?
I ran to the kitchen to get my cell phone.
And what did you do when you got your cell phone?
I got my cell phone, I walked back to the window.
Okay. And what were you doing with your cell phone?
I got it to dial 911.
When you were dialing 911, what were you doing, sir?
I was looking out the window.
And what did you see when you were looking out the window and making that 911 call, sir?
I saw the male attacker in the middle of the street. He was shouting with another individual.
Could you see the female?
No.
The person you saw originally, the male you saw in front of 57 Gate Street, you saw him shouting with someone else?
Correct.
Where was that taking place?
In the middle of the street.
In the middle of the street in relation, where in relation to 57 Gates?
I was up the street a little bit more towards Telegraph Street, so it was directly in front of my unit.
So it was directly in front of your house?
Correct.
And what type of exchange was going on there? Could you hear what was being said?
The only thing I heard was, I saw what you did.
Now, the original person you saw in front of 57 Gate Street with the female, did he stay in the area?
For a brief moment.
And where did you wind up seeing him go?
To my right, so up the street towards Telegraph Street.
And if you were to continue all the way up Gates through Telegraph, where would that take you?
Dorchester Street.
And if you were to continue up Gates, then down Telegraph Street to the left, where would that take you?
Dorchester Street.
Did you say anything, direct any comments to the person in the middle of the street that you saw originally with the female in front of 57 Gates?
Yes, I did. I said, "Hey, asshole, cops are on the way."
What type of reaction, if any, did that generate?
He looked up at me, and then he proceeded to walk away towards Telegraph Street.
Okay. As best you could, Mr. Stanton, when you called 911, did you provide a description?
I did.
Do you recall what that description was?
6 feet, African-American male, white shirt, jeans, was wearing a baseball cap, I believe to be Boston Red Sox.
Did the police wind up coming to 57 Gate Street?
They did.
And what, if anything, did you do to make yourself known?
Came downstairs, talked to a police officer.
Mr. Stanton, I just want you to listen to this call. And I'm accessing Exhibit
919. What is the location of your emergency?
It's across the street from 58 Gate Street, South Boston.
58 Gate Street?
Yes.
Okay, and what's the problem there?
I heard shooting outside the window. I looked outside. I had a African-American male about 6 feet tall, grabbed a girl. He wrapped his arms around her throat, pushed her into the door, and ran up the street.
Pushed her into the door of what?
She was walking into her apartment.
Pushed her into the door of the house?
Yeah. I saw outside my bedroom window her screaming.
Yeah.
And then I poked my head outside the window, and I saw her. He had his hands around her neck in the front of the door. And a couple of people shot her outside the window, and he ran away.
Okay. So where did he run?
Up the street.
Up, sir, I don't know. What up is, sir?
Sorry, up 8th Street towards Dorchester Street.
Towards Dorchester Street?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Did you see anything he was wearing?
Hat.
Baseball cap?
Yes, baseball cap.
Can you tell the color?
I think it was reddish.
Reddish? Okay.
Yeah.
Shirt?
I want to say white, but I'm not sure on that.
Okay. Like a button down or t-shirt or?
T-shirt.
T-shirt. Okay. Pants, shorts?
Pants.
Pants. Remember what color?
I think jeans.
Blue jeans?
Yes, correct.
Can you tell how old they looked?
Oh, I couldn't be like late 20s, but I'm not sure on that.
Okay. All right, how about the female? Is she black, white, Hispanic, Asian?
White. She's actually outside her house now. I think she's just talking to people. There's a bunch of people out in the street. I just wanted to call it in because...
Okay, what does she look like, sir? What's she wearing?
Oh, is she not there? No, I just gotta go back in. The girl was probably mid to late 20s, white. Other than that, I'm not sure.
You don't remember if she was wearing a t-shirt?
No, because she ran in the door very quickly and tried to slam it on her.
Okay. And it's across the street from 58.
Yeah,
What is
it's,
that?
yeah, three-family apartment building. Yeah, let me just look for that. Can you see the number there? Yeah, I can't make out the numbers right across from 58 East.
Okay. All right. Okay, so they're on the way, okay?
I thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
So Stanton's death cause you made early morning hours, July 24th, 2013.
Yes.
That's all I have for the witness.
Yes.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
My name is Jeff Benner. I represent the defendant, and I've got just a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
We've never met, we've never spoken, correct?
Correct.
Do you remember the date that we're talking about that this occurred?
July 23rd, going into the 24th.
And that would have been a Monday going to Tuesday, a Tuesday going to Wednesday. Do you remember?
I'm not 100% sure. I think it was probably a Tuesday going into a
And
Wednesday.
you were pretty clear-headed that night. You hadn't been sleeping, you hadn't been drinking, correct?
Nope, correct.
And you were with a female.
I was.
And you've testified you heard screaming, and that probably got your adrenaline pumping, and you ran to the window, correct?
Correct.
And when you got to the window, it'd be fair to say that the lighting was very strong. I think that was the word you used to the grand jury, wasn't it? Strong lighting?
I believe so.
Because it is a very well-lighted, strongly lighted area, is it not?
Towards 57, yes.
And it's also a pretty congested area, correct? Cars parked next to each other, hard to get parking, a lot of people around usually, right?
Correct.
And at this time, you became a percipient witness to what appeared to be a fairly serious assault, yes?
Correct.
And you weren't the only witness, were you?
I don't believe so.
Because you testified today that you actually saw another man basically right out in the road in front of 57 screaming and yelling.
Correct.
And he was engaging with the individual, And I'm assuming that's the individual right there, correct? You haven't identified him yet, but is that man sitting right there?
I'm not sure. I didn't see the individual's face.
So when you're sitting here today, you don't know if it was him, you just know that something occurred there, correct?
I do, correct.
Okay. So the other witness, had you ever learned his name, by the way?
Charles Reddy.
So Charles Reddy is actually yelling at him and basically trying to stop what's happening too, correct?
Correct. He was yelling at him, correct.
Right. So there's at least two of you who are percipient witnesses to what's going on in a highly well-lighted area, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then at some point, you called 911. Yes?
Correct.
Have you ever called 911 before?
No.
But your expectation was that you got through, and your expectation was they'd be coming pretty quickly, yes?
Yes.
And you let the individual assailant know that you'd called 911, that you called the police, correct?
Correct.
And you yelled something like, "Hey, asshole, the police are coming. You better get out," or something to that effect, yes?
Correct.
And did he run away, yes or no?
He did not run.
He did not run. In fact, didn't he, as you testified earlier, didn't he look up at you, make eye contact with you, and then walk slowly away?
Yeah, he walked away. I don't know the speed at which he walked, but he did walk.
Well, if you had testified at page 11 of your grand jury, which I can show you, if need be, that you said at that point he walked slowly away, would that essentially change your answer?
No, if I said it during the grand jury testimony, then that's what I believed at the time.
Might I approach the witness? Remember when you testified at the grand jury?
The date?
Yes.
I do not.
Remember where it was in relation to this incident?
The grand jury testimony?
Yes.
It was in this building.
Excuse me?
The grand jury testimony?
Yes.
It was in this building, I believe.
I'm sorry, that was my bad question. Do you remember when it was in relation to this incident?
After?
But you remember it was a lot closer in time than today, correct?
Correct.
And you had a pretty good recollection of what happened.
Correct.
And this is not something likely you're going to forget, correct?
Correct.
And when you testified to the grand jury, as far as you know, your recollection was clear and what you testified to was accurate.
Correct.
Did you review your grand jury testimony before coming to testify today?
I did a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Did anything jump out at you as being inaccurate?
No, I don't believe so.
May I approach you? I ask you to please take a look at the portion I've underlined.
Sure.
Have you seen that?
Yep, I said that.
Now, when I ask you again, at what speed did the assailant depart the scene? What would your answer be?
Slowly.
I have no further questions.
Nothing further from Mr. Stanton, Your Honor. Dr. Anna McDonald, Your Honor.
Stand here, face the clerk, and raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the jury and the court and the cause now at hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Thank you.
May I inquire, Your Honor? Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself in a loud, clear voice to the court and to the jury and spell your last name?
Sure. I'm Dr. Anna McDonald, McDonald.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a physician or a medical doctor.
And how long have you been a doctor for?
8 years.
Where are you working right now, Dr. McDonald?
So I live in North Carolina. I work at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center.
And what is your title?
I'm a forensic pathologist.
Okay. And prior to your current position, where did you work, Dr. McDonald?
I worked at the Boston office of the Chief Medical Examiner,
And what was your position there?
a medical examiner.
Could you just tell the jury a little bit about your educational training and background that brought you to your position as a medical examiner in Boston?
Yes, sir. So I did my college at Davidson College in North Carolina. I went to Duke University Medical Center for medical school. And then after that, I came up to Boston to Mass General and did my residency in anatomic and clinical pathology. And then I did a fellowship in pediatric pathology and then a fellowship in forensic pathology.
Okay. And could you just describe for the jury what that term means, forensic pathology?
Sure. So pathology in and of itself is a branch of medicine that deals with the laboratory aspects of disease or injury. So we look at tissue and body fluids and bodies in the case of autopsies. And so if you're a forensic pathologist, you're sort of subspecialized under that, and you essentially deal with autopsies in the setting of trying to determine cause and manner of death. And it's a specific type of death for forensic pathologists where we get a subset of cases that are sudden, unexpected, or violent deaths are the ones that we investigate, by and large.
Dr. McDonald, can you tell the jury what licenses and certifications you hold?
Sure. So for medical licenses,
Certainly stipulate if Commonwealth wants it, this doctor's expertise to testify as an expert in this case.
I'll move along, Your Honor. So, Dr. McDonald, you were certified, a certified licensed physician as of July 24th, 25th, and 26th of 2013,
in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, yes.
and you were working where back then?
At the Boston office of the Chief Medical Examiner,
And what street is that located on?
Albany Street.
And could you tell the jury what is the function of that office, the medical examiner's office?
Sure. So the medical examiner office consists of a multitude of people, but a subset of us are forensic pathologists. Again, it's the subset of physicians whose sole goal is to determine the cause and manner of death in sudden, unexpected, and in violent cases of death.
And does that include the examination of deceased individuals?
Yes, sir.
Directing your attention back to July 23rd into the 24th of 2013, were you working at the medical examiner's office back then?
Yes.
Subsequent to July 23rd of 2013, did you wind up performing an autopsy on an Amy Elizabeth Lord?
Yes.
When did that autopsy start?
On July the 24th in the morning time,
Okay, and when did it conclude?
in the evening of the 25th.
Directing your attention to the early evening of July 23rd of 2013, did you work on that day?
Yes.
In the early evening hours, did you receive a phone call?
Yes.
As a result of the phone call, did you wind up going somewhere?
Yes.
And where did you wind up going?
I went to the scene at Hyde Park. I was told to come out, and there was a homicide that needed investigating from a medical examiner perspective.
Okay. And that scene that you wound up visiting, subsequently, did you wind up going to an area of the Stony Brook Reservation?
Yes.
And where did you go specifically?
I was driven there. It was a wooded area beyond a chain gate. I walked down with the officers, saw pictures, went and visited the tents that the officers had set up for me to examine.
And the autopsy you performed subsequently, was the victim of that autopsy at the scene that you visited on July 23rd of 2013?
Yes.
Just generally, could you tell the jury what you did on July 23rd of 2013 at the scene?
Sure. So as part of medical legal death investigations, ideally the pathologist is able to go to every scene. In reality, we go to a subset of scenes to try to understand better what the circumstances of the death are. Obviously, we determine the cause after the autopsy, but seeing the scene, seeing what is around the deceased individual, what the environment is like, things like that sort of help you determine the manner of death as well.
And in an answer a moment ago, you used the term autopsy. What is an autopsy? Could you explain what that is for the jury, please?
Sure. So an autopsy consists of two main parts. So one is the external examination, and that's essentially similar to when the physician does a physical on any one of us. It's looking from head to toe, looking at wounds, scars, anything that's abnormal on the outside. And then surgical-like incisions are made in the shape of a Y, where you then open the body to see what has happened to the organs internally, try to identify diseases, things like that. So there's an external exam, and then you make the incisions, and there's an internal examination as well.
And how many autopsies had you performed as of approximately July 24th of 2013, Dr. McDonald?
As of that date, approximately maybe 375.
And how long had you been working in Boston at the medical examiner's office as of that date?
So I had started in October of 2012. And this was then July 2013.
And that was a full-time job? Mm-hmm. The autopsy that you just referenced a moment ago that you conducted on Amy Lord, where did that one take place?
The autopsy itself took place on Albany Street, again at the chief's office.
And that started on what date?
July 24th.
Regarding that particular autopsy, you had the opportunity to examine her body?
Yes.
Was there any evidence of treatment?
No.
Did you, as part
Meaning
of
medical
the...
treatment, yeah.
I'm sorry, what was your answer?
I said meaning medical treatment, no.
As part of your autopsy, did you conduct initially an external examination?
Yes, as always, in every autopsy.
And would that include taking the height and weight of the decedent?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the height and weight?
So she was 5 feet tall and 153 pounds by our scale.
And as part of your external examination, did you note any evidence of trauma?
Yes.
And what do you mean by, explain that term for the jury, trauma?
Sure. So in forensic pathology terms, we have different types of trauma. So there are certain types of trauma that are blunt force, things that are caused by blunt objects. If someone strikes you with a baseball bat, that's a blunt object. If you fall down on the ground and you skin your knee, that's the ground as a blunt object as well. So we use different terms to understand blunt force injuries, and she did have evidence of blunt force injuries in various areas of her body.
Okay. And when you say various areas of her body, would that include the head area?
Yes.
And as far as blunt force injuries go, would that also include the torso area?
Yes.
As part of your autopsy that you performed on the 24th and 25th of July 2013, did you take notes?
Yes.
And in addition to your notes, did you complete or render any drawings?
Yes.
And could you just describe those briefly for the jury, please?
Yes, so with each set of injuries, I try to create a template so that I can understand where the various injuries are, so that we can, like in this setting, go back and refer to them for both the generation of the report, but also in the court setting.
And as part of your drawings, did you include drawings that mapped out or diagrammed the blunt force injuries to the head that you just
Yes.
described? Dr. McDonald, just showing you this particular diagram, do you recognize what's captured on this board here?
Yes, but I believe we wanted to use the other one initially as well.
Well, why don't we start?
Okay, sure.
Do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
And what do you see here?
I see a template of a head and neck, and it is displaying both the internal blunt force injuries as well as injuries related to strangulation.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of your notes on this anatomy diagram that you took during the autopsy on July 24th and 25th of 2013?
Yes.
May this be marked as the next number exhibit, Your Honor?
Yes.
Exhibit 193, so marked, Your Honor.
And now I'll get to this one, Dr. McDonald. Just showing you this particular diagram board, do you recognize what's captured on this board?
Yes.
And what do you see here?
So it's a template of an individual front and back that's displaying different areas of blunt force injuries.
Okay. Full figure?
Full figure,
And
yes.
is this a fair and accurate representation of your notes on the anatomy diagram during the autopsy on July 24th and 25th, 2013?
Yes.
May this be marked as the next number exhibit, Your Honor?
Yes.
Exhibit 194, so marked, Your Honor.
Can we start with the full figure one?
Yes, please.
And Dr. McDonald, if you need to, I'm going to let me give you a pointer.
Perfect.
Dr. McDonald, I'm displaying exhibit number 194 on the easel. And with respect to that particular diagram, just explain for the jury what's depicted right there.
Yes, so again, this is a full figure diagram of an individual, and it is showing specific types of injuries related to blunt force impact. So blunt force injuries, there's sort of subcategories of them. There are bruises or contusions, is the word we use. There's abrasions, which is essentially a skin scrape, the kind of a reddish colored skin scrape, and those are the two main words that we use to describe blunt force injuries, externally in this case.
And where did you note injuries in particular as far as the torso goes?
So as far as the torso goes, we have an abrasion, so again a skin scrape, near the right shoulder and the left shoulder. It's 1 inch and 2 inches in greatest dimension respectively.
And feel free to use the pointer if you need to point that out.
Thank you for reminding me. So again, we have then we have an abrasion right here and right here. And then if we look on the back of the torso, if we flip the decedent over, on the left-hand side of her back, there was a 7-inch by 6-inch area of linear red abrasions, so essentially linear scratches. And then on the right-hand side, there was a small contusion right here over the right buttock. And that is the torso blunt force injuries.
And I just want to direct your attention to the head area. What did you note, if anything, around the eyes?
So there was periorbital hematomas, which essentially means that you have blood under the tissue around the eyes. In layman's terms, we kind of think of it as a black eye, is what it looked like on both sides. She additionally had a contusion or a bruise on the right side of her nose, and as well as a contusion over her right ear.
Any other injuries that you noted with respect to blunt force injuries of the torso?
Of the torso, no.
And typically, Dr. McDonald, during the course of an autopsy, how is the autopsy itself memorialized in the injuries you know?
We generate an autopsy report to depict all the injuries.
And what about photographic representations?
Photographs are taken as well, yes.
You also noted some blunt force injuries to the head as well?
Internally, yes.
And just putting up for a moment exhibit number 193, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And as far as blunt force injuries to the head, what did you note?
So I described the blunt force injuries on the face and over the ear. We also look for blunt force injuries internally, so in order to do so, the scalp is reflected, and we look for areas of essentially bruising under the scalp, and we examine the brain, et cetera, as well. And in this decedent, we did find areas of bruising between the scalp and the skull. So there were 3, they're not actually in the picture, I'm sorry, but my notes are right here. There are 3 areas of hemorrhage, approximately 1 inch in greatest dimension over the back of her head. Again, it's in that soft tissue between her scalp and her skull. And in the same vein, there was a 3-inch area on the left side of her head, again, between her scalp and her skull. So these were areas of bleeding up under the skull, up under the scalp, that indicated, again, areas of blunt force impact.
Blunt force impact? Mm-hmm. And I want to direct your attention for a moment to the mouth area. Did you make any observations of Ms. Lord's mouth area, specifically her teeth?
Yes. So in examining her teeth, I was able to find a recent fracture of essentially her left front tooth, which is her left upper central incisor, tooth number 9, but there was a little chip on the medial aspect of that tooth. There was a recent fracture.
Excuse me?
There was a recent fracture.
And you noted that in your autopsy report?
Yes.
As part of the autopsy procedure itself, did you collect any clothing, articles of clothing?
Yes, all articles of clothing were taken off and put in keeping for evidence.
And what about personal effects?
As well, same.
And I just want to show you these 2 photographs initially. Dr. McDonald, do you recognize these 2 photographs?
Yes, they're the decedent's clothing and personal effects.
And are those fair and accurate representations of how those items were depicted during the autopsy that you're testifying to
Yes.
today? It will be marked as the next number of exhibits you're on.
Yes.
exhibits 195 and 196 so marked, Your Honor.
Dr. McDonald, I want to show you this particular photograph and ask you if you recognize what's depicted here.
Yes.
And what is depicted in that particular photograph?
It is the recent fracture again of that left front tooth that I was describing, tooth number 9.
And when you say tooth number 9, where is that, on the top or the bottom?
It's on the top. It's the top front.
Top front.
tooth.
Okay. Top front middle?
Yes.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of that tooth during the autopsy you performed on the dates you've described?
Yes.
May this be marked, Your Honor?
Exhibit 197 so marked, Your Honor.
May 197 be published, Your Honor?
Yes.
Still directing your attention to the exhibit on the easel, Dr. McDonald, number 193. I want to direct your attention to this area right here. Can you put the pointer on that?
Yes.
And what did you note during your autopsy as depicted on exhibit number 193 where you just pointed?
Yes. So this is a different subset of injuries that I'm describing here that are associated with strangulation type injuries.
Okay.
It consists of 2 abrasions. So she has an abrasion here that is 1.5 inches long that extends from the right corner of her mouth towards her right ear. She also has 2 smaller abrasions down on the right side of her neck, which are 1.25 inches and 1.5 inches, again, in greatest dimension. So when we see external injuries like this, the index of suspicion for asphyxia goes up. So we also, as in every case, we look for petechiae anywhere. And we found...
What a petechiae?
Sure. So petechiae, if you can imagine someone compressing the neck, you compress blood vessels, you have a windpipe there, you have lots of structures there. When you compress the blood vessels, the blood can't actually leave the head, so it kind of bursts out of the small, little tiny blood vessels. And what we see as a pathologist is you see petechiae. They look like little tiny bleeds in areas where there are small vessels. So we look in the mouth and the eyes and in various areas for evidence of those.
And did your examination consist of looking in those areas of the eyes and mouth as you've described them?
Yes.
And what were the results, Dr. McDonald?
So she had many petechiae in her mouth, so in the soft surface behind her lips that were prominent. And that's what I saw for as far as petechiae goes.
And you're still talking about your external examination at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Were there any associated injuries with the petechiae that you've just described for the jury, based on your internal exam?
Sure. So once we make the external findings, again, we make the surgical-like incisions to observe the organs inside. And when a neck is compressed, again, I said you compress blood vessels, you can compress your windpipe. Well, there are certain little bony structures in your neck that are particularly susceptible to breaking if someone's compressing on your neck. And we found in this decedent that one of those bony structures, called the hyoid bone, way up high, was fractured.
Okay. And what does that mean? What is the effect of a fractured hyoid bone?
So the actual fracture of that bone in and of itself is not lethal. It's simply the compression, again, of those vessels and that windpipe, which are depriving your brain of oxygen, that is the lethal act.
Okay. And that type of injury in and of itself, can that be a fatal injury?
Yes.
I want to hand you a sequence of 3 photographs, Dr. McDonald. I ask you to take a look at these 3 photographs sequentially, if you would. And just let me know what you've done.
Yes.
And do you recognize what's depicted in those 3 photographs, Doctor?
I do.
And what do you see there?
So in each of the photographs, we're examining different areas of oral mucosa, or again, that soft tissue kind of behind your lips, between your lips and your gums, and it's showing the petechiae that I had described earlier.
And how are they memorialized or captured in the photograph in the 3 photographs that you have before you?
So they're seen as the little small red punctate bloody areas, essentially again on the lip mucosa that I was describing, both on the lower lip mucosa and again on the upper lip mucosa as well.
And are these fair and accurate representations of those areas of Ms. Lord's body as they appeared when you were conducting your autopsy?
Yes.
May these be marked as the next numbered exhibits, Your Honor?
Yes.
$198, $199, and $200 so much, Your Honor.
Dr. McDonald, I want to ask you a follow-up question about exhibit number 198. And I want to direct your attention, does that photograph capture the facial area of Amy Lord?
Yes.
And are her eyes depicted in that particular photograph?
Yes.
And what can you tell the jury about the condition of her eyes relative to the blunt force trauma you described to her facial area a few moments ago?
So the periorbital hematomas are, again, just essentially the blood and the soft tissue around the eye is depicted in both of her eyes in this photograph.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may exhibits 198, 199, and 200 be published?
Yes.
Did you continue on with your autopsy of Amy Lord following the observations that you made and of injuries that you just testified to?
Yes.
And what was the next area where you observed any evidence of trauma?
So in the neck area, I've observed evidence of sharp force injury. We discussed blunt force injury. Sharp force injury is another category of injuries that, in this case, is produced by a sharp object. So unlike a baseball bat, something like a knife or something like that, with a sharp edge. We use two different words for sharp force injury that I'll describe. There's a stab wound, which is deeper than it is long on the skin. And then there's an incised wound, which is much longer on the skin than it is deep. Both, again, are just describing different types of sharp force injury. Depends on the depth.
And again, with respect to those sharp force injuries to the neck area, did you map those out on an anatomical diagram?
Yes.
Dr. McDonald, I want to show you this particular...
Wait. Something just unplugged. Your Honor, could I just have a second? Something unplugged. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Dr. McDonald, do you recognize the board that I have before you right here?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
So this is a template examination, again, of the head and neck area, and this time it's detailing sharp force injuries of this individual.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the drawings and markings that you completed during your autopsy that you're testifying to today on July 23rd and 24th?
Yes.
24th and 25th, excuse me.
Yes.
May this be marked as the next number exhibit, Your Honor?
Yes.
Exhibit 201 so marked, Your Honor.
Dr. McDonald, I'm putting Exhibit 201 up on the easel. I want to direct your attention to the right-hand side of Exhibit number 201. Can you see that okay?
So we're talking about this area.
And do you see certain letter markings on the right-hand side of the exhibit?
Yes.
And sequentially in the alphabet, which letters are represented there?
So this is lettered A through V. It's my way of keeping different wounds straight, trying to write down characteristics of different types of wounds. So that's encompassing 22 sharp force injuries.
Okay. And that's to the neck area?
Yes.
And with respect to those sharp force injuries, those 22 sharp force injuries to the neck area, Dr. McDonald, what did you note? First of all, let me ask you a follow-up.
Sure.
You had said a moment ago that you were describing the difference between incised stab wounds and stab wounds.
I was describing the difference between a stab wound and an incised wound.
Incised wound and a stab wound.
Yes.
And out of the 22 sharp force injuries to the neck that you observed during your autopsy, were you able to distinguish between incised wounds and stab wounds?
Yes.
On how many different occasions?
So of the 22 sharp force injuries, 10 of them were classified as stab wounds, and 12 were classified as incised wounds.
Now, as part of your autopsy and your internal exam, are you familiar with the term wound path?
Yes.
What is a wound path?
So a wound path is essentially describing all the main structures that a specific wound hits. So a wound will go through the skin and soft tissue, and then you want to further describe what other structures a specific wound, like stab wound A, might hit as well, or penetrate.
Now, out of these 22 stab wounds, these sharp force injuries you saw to the neck area, were you able to distinguish if any one of those in particular was fatal?
No.
And why is that?
Encountering 22 sharp force injuries in such a small area, many of the wound paths overlapped and became convoluted, so that I was able to see what structures were damaged, but I couldn't say it was stab wound D, for example, that perforated this specific structure. Again, it was with any degree of certainty I couldn't tell which path went where, because again all the paths were crossing each other inside the neck.
You conducted an internal examination as well as part of this autopsy?
Yes.
And relative to the 22 stab wounds, the 22 sharp force injuries in the neck area, were there any associated injuries with those stab wounds?
Internally, yes. So the sharp force injuries went through most of the muscles that are on the front side of your neck, but more importantly underneath the left internal jugular vein. So that's a large vessel that's essentially taking blood out of the head, bringing it down to the rest of your body, was perforated, which means the implement went all the way through the vessel or transected it. In addition, the esophagus, or that tube that runs from your mouth to your stomach, that as well was perforated, or the implement went all the way through it. So it was the left internal jugular vein, the esophagus, and we've talked a little bit about the cartilages in the neck, or the bony structures. The cartilage that has your Adam's apple on it, that's called your thyroid cartilage, that cartilage was penetrated, meaning the implement went into, but didn't go all the way through on both sides. So those were the main internal structures that were penetrated or perforated.
And with respect to the jugular vein, the left jugular, just elaborate, if you would, for the jury a little bit, what type of vein that is.
Sure. So it's a large caliber vein. It's not a small one. And so if left unattended, that in and of itself, you could lose a lot of blood out of that wound.
And with respect to, you said there was some damage to the esophagus that you noted?
Yes.
And what would be potentially the effect of that type of injury on a person?
If left unattended to, eventually it could be lethal.
Would that have an impact, if you know, on one's ability to breathe?
The perforation of the esophagus?
Yes.
I don't believe so, but I don't know to be certain.
And you said you weren't able to determine specific wound paths for the 22 wounds that you saw
Correct.
there?
In this area.
In the area of the neck?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. McDonald, I want to show you two photographs and ask you if you recognize what's depicted in these two photographs.
I do.
And what do you see there?
So these are photographs of the decedent taken at the autopsy, which are photographically representing these sharp force injuries from A to V that I described to you all.
And in these photographs, as they appear before you, they're inaccurate representations as of the time when you were performing the autopsy?
Yes.
May these be marked as the next numbered exhibits, Your Honor.
Yes.
Dr. McDonald.
Excuse me, exhibits 202 and 203, so marked, Your Honor.
I want to direct your attention to exhibit number 203 for a moment and ask you some questions about that. You had described for the jury a few moments ago when we had exhibit number 193 up on the easel, strangulation type injuries.
Yes.
And what evidence, if any, do you see of strangulation type injuries that are noted in exhibit number 203?
So externally, I had noted the abrasion between the side of her lip going back towards her ear.
And when you say the side of her lip, are we talking about the right or left side?
The right.
And going back in which direction?
Just heading towards her right ear, so corner the right side of her mouth to her right ear.
And is that depicted in exhibit number 203?
It is. In addition, the 2 abrasions on the right side of her neck that I depicted are as well in this photograph.
May exhibits 202 and 203 be published to the jury, Your Honor?
Members of the board, just testing photographs?
Yes, Your Honor.
As a jury, these photographs are a little difficult to look at because of the nature of them. The reason why the photographs come into evidence is for the evidentiary purpose, of course. Juries decide cases based upon evidence. They don't decide cases based upon sympathy. You have to decide cases based upon the facts. The photographs that are going to be introduced and shown to you show the nature of the injury. So please consider these photographs for their clinical or evidentiary value, not for any sympathetic reasons.
I'd like to ask you a couple of follow-up questions, Dr. McDonald, with respect to exhibits numbers 202 and 203, if that's okay. Directing your attention to the neck area, could you explain for the jury relative to the wounds labeled A through B, do you note any discoloration around those wounds to the skin?
Yes, there's brown discoloration among the wounds.
And could you explain to the jury, if you would, what you would attribute the brown discoloration to around those wounds?
It's related to decompositional change.
And what does that mean in lay terms?
It essentially means the body is breaking down after death, and some areas tend to decompose faster than others. And in this deceased individual, this area decomposed faster.
Would, of course, mention maybe be published?
Yes.
When you concluded with the neck area, did your autopsy continue?
Yes.
To which portion of the body?
To the torso.
And was there any evidence of trauma relative to the torso?
There were sharp force injuries of the torso.
And with respect to sharp force injuries of the torso, how many did you note, Dr. McDonald?
So there were 43 injuries total, sharp force on the torso. Of those, 30 were stab wounds and 13 were incised wounds.
And again, I'll ask you the same question. Did you continue to document using anatomy diagrams relative to the sharp force injuries you saw on the torso?
Yes.
And I want to show you this particular diagram right now for a moment. Dr. McDonald, do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
This is my template of the full figure that's showing the sharp force injuries of the torso.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of your drawings that you rendered and markings when you did the autopsy on July 24th and 25th of 2013?
Yes.
May this be marked as the next number of the
Exhibit number 204 is so marked.
Turn away, wait. You heard briefly. Begin about your own.
Yes.
Excuse me, Your Honor, are those being marked?
And Dr. McDonald, I just want to direct your attention to that portion of your report that dealt with the sharp force injuries of the torso. If we could focus on that now, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And again, the markings, you have your diagram in front of you of the torso.
I do.
Chronologically, are the wounds listed alphabetically?
Yes.
And what's the progression of the wounds relative to the sharp force injuries of the torso? Where do they start? Which letter?
X.
X.
W.
Thank you, Doctor. And once you reach, do they reach Z?
They do.
And once you reach D, what would be the next letter chronologically in your report?
I start using double A, double B, double C.
Okay. And those particular injuries, do they run through right to YY?
Yes, they do.
And if we could for a moment focus on those injuries, and we'll walk through them chronologically. Just generally starting with...
It's not alphabetically because we can't chronologically date them.
Correct.
Timestamp, it's all alphabetically.
Alphabetically, yes. As far as wounds W, X, and Y, can you describe those for the jury, please?
Yes. So W and X are incised wounds, again, longer on the skin than they are deep. And that is on the decedent's right upper chest, moving towards her shoulder.
Okay.
Wound number Y is actually a stab wound, and that is on the right side of her chest, sort of all the way around on the side.
Okay. And just bypassing Z for a moment, what about AA and BB?
So AA and BB are incised wound and a stab wound respectively. So AA is an incised wound, BB is a stab wound. And those are located between her breastbone and her right breast.
Okay. And what about wound HH?
Wound HH is a stab wound, and that is located on her right flank.
And I want to ask you now if you could describe wounds II, JJ, KK, and LL.
So II and JJ, again, are stab wounds, and they're located in the right lower quadrant of her belly, so sort of on the bottom right-hand side. KK is additionally a stab wound, but is closer to her abdominal midline above her belly button.
Okay. And what about LL?
LL, I'll direct you up to the left-hand side of her torso, up near her collarbone. It's an incised wound up near her left collarbone.
And next, Dr. McDonald, directing your attention to QQ, RR, SS, and TT. Could you describe those wounds, please?
So QQ is an incised wound, and that again is of her left upper chest moving towards her shoulder. RR is similar, it's in the same area, but it is a stab wound, again, of her her left upper chest, near her left shoulder. SS is a little bit hard to see, it's above her left nipple, so it's a stab wound directly above her left nipple into her left breast. And TT is a stab wound as well, and we're back down on the abdomen, near the abdominal midline.
And directing your attention to the back area of Ms. Lord's body, did you make note of any sharp force injuries to the back?
Yes.
And just directing your attention to wounds VV, WWW, and XXX. Could you describe those for the jury, please?
Yes, so the three wounds that he described are all stab wounds. And so WWW is over the left shoulder blade, VVV is up near her right shoulder, and XXX is over her right shoulder blade.
And lastly, once you reached sequentially the end of the alphabet in triplicate, what was the next sequence?
Once I go through the triple letters, I start quadruple letters, so A, B, 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 B. As indicated here, I wrote it as A4, B4, C4 because I was running out of room.
Okay. And with respect to injuries A4, B4, and C4, what types of injuries were those?
Those were stab wounds as well. They're on the right side of her lower back, going through her skin and into her soft tissue.
I want to show you a sequence of 5 photographs, Dr. McDonald, and ask you if you recognize those.
I do.
And what do you have before you there?
These are photographs from the autopsy that are photographically showing the sharp force injuries of the front and back of the torso.
And are these fair and accurate representations?
Yes.
May these be marked as the next numbered exhibits, Your Honor.
Let's see photograph, which one? I was going to just pass them up. Where have you been?
Thank you, Your Honor.
exhibits 205 through 209, so marked, Your Honor.
And these be published, Your Honor?
Yeah.
In sequence, as you went through the torso sharp force injuries, did we skip over some letters?
We did.
And I want to show you this particular diagram, Dr. McDonald, right here. Do you recognize generally what's depicted right here?
Yes.
And what do you see?
It is an anatomical sketch looking at the internal organs and bony structures of the upper part of the torso.
And relative to some of the injuries we're about to get into, did you note, just generally at this point, associated injuries with those sharp force injuries?
Yes.
And just generally to what parts of the body?
To the front of the chest and the back of the chest.
And as they penetrated, what parts of the body?
So
Just generally.
Sure. So essentially penetrated the chest and the abdomen and the back as well.
And were any organs damaged? Were there any associated injuries to the organs after the penetration of the chest and the back?
Yes.
And does this fairly and accurately depict, at least in a general way, some of those areas?
Yes.
May this be marked as the next numbered exhibit, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Exhibit 210, so marked, Your Honor.
Dr. McDonald, did you have, during the course of your autopsy, did you also have the opportunity, or did you also label those injuries?
Yes, in determining the wound path, I did.
Course Commissioner, may the witness step down, Your Honor?
Yeah.
And just make an effort now that you're off the stand to keep your voice up, Dr. McDonald.
Yes.
Starting with wound Z in your autopsy report,